Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again. It's a new season. It's springtime. Everything. It's a great time. The weather has changed. You know,
it's much warmer, which is
I'm
fantastic.
dressed for the occasion. And you guys, didn't you guys get the memo? We're celebrating a new season.
No, I clearly didn't get the memo.
Yeah.
You must be inspired by Mandela. All these bright colors and flowers. Are those flowers on your shirt?
Not Mandela, but the Impressionist movement. I don't know how much of the art you.
I'm not well informed about the arts, I'm afraid.
Well, okay. Spring has sprung. Please share your memories of spring, and we hope that this will be a very useful season for Friday Drinks. This is season what now?
Season 9.
Season 9. Can you?
Yeah, we've been at it for a minute.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Cheers to that.
But, yeah, we promise a lot of fireworks. We promise a lot of people. I think we are going to, up the game. There's a lot to analyze for the next 5 years, and I think we're up for it.
Yeah, and adding some different voices. Obviously, people with experience and exposure in other areas, so that maybe our viewers don't just keep hearing our voices.
Same noise.
Yeah, same noises.
Are you trying? Is that your way you're trying to tell us that we'll have more socialists on the show?
No, so socialists, communists, capitalists, all the illists that you can think of, but you just want to make the conversations even more exciting. Anyone that has got a view that's worth listening to, will certainly accommodate them on the show.
Fantastic. So to kick off the show, today is a special one. We've just gone through an election process, and I think as of now, we do have the incoming president, President Mnangagwa. And what we're going to do is to analyze a number of things, what's topical, which we think we just need to analyze a little bit more of. It's illegal immigrants and the impact of illegal immigrants to how SADC is perceiving Zimbabwe and the reports that came out of Zimbabwe, and also the debt restructuring. Mm-hmm. How is that informed by the illegal immigrant crisis in SADC, or is it a crisis? Well, we'll get into the details. And before we do that, before we get into the weeds, maybe we can start off with... it's new season, you have 3 bottles. What's actually happening there? Tell us.
Yeah, well... It seems because we have the producer on the show, we weren't particularly organized, and we've been sitting here for a minute, and so I opened the bottle. But it's a fantastic single malt from Glen Scotia. It's aged in 2 types of barrels, rum and bourbon, which impart sweet, spicy flavor. Absolutely fantastic. And I have this, I recently acquired this, it's called a dram. It's, this kind of whiskey tasting glass, and it's just fantastic for nosing your whiskey and sipping it. And we also have this coffee liqueur from Nairobi. I understand
from Prakash Radia.
Yeah, a fan of the show, based in
Nairobi.
In Nairobi, who came through last week. So whenever you guys say something particularly mind-numbing, I'm going to have a shot of this.
Thank you very much, Prakash. And courtesy of Prakash, he brought us some goodies.
Yeah.
Kericho Gold, lots of Kericho Gold, coffee and teas. And today we're going to have the green tea and yasmin.
Yeah. So he delivered them, and he was saying to me, please tell the guys that he enjoys the show. He watches it from Kenya, and he thinks that we sometimes make some very interesting points.
Even though we don't know what we're talking about.
And his first gift was the liquor, and then
there was some whining about how he looked after the interesting people on the show.
Yes. And then obviously he then came back with goodies, with some teas and coffees. So thank you so much. We appreciate that you are a big fan of the show, but also that you bring gifts whenever I come here.
Oh, fantastic. Yes. We love it. So much tea.
Exactly.
And it is the season, so love it. So the producer has just told me that we've just clocked 4K subscribers. Well done. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Continue sharing, continue subscribing, continue liking. This is why we do it. And it's special for us. And we love every one of our tribe. And it's a growing community. I love it. What do you guys think?
No, I think it's fantastic that we can have conversations with different points of view where we can disagree without being disagreeable. And I think, I'm certainly richer for many of the conversations that we've had here. I've learned a whole bunch. And I hope that's true for you and Ranga and the others who we've had on the show.
Consumed a lot of alcohol.
Yes, that's...
And you never get tired. I thought at some point you'd say, you know what, I've had enough.
One of the things that, in terms of my drinking journey, is it's made me explore many more interesting tipples than I otherwise would have. If it wasn't for this show and having to actually talk about something interesting that we're drinking, I'd probably just be a boring guy who drinks the same brand of whiskey all the time.
For the longest that I've known you, when I started knowing you, you were a beer drinker.
Yeah.
And now the stuff is getting more and more lethal.
I wouldn't use lethal. I think interesting. I'm still a beer drinker, by the way. I'm not faithful to any particular type of tipple. All of the tipples are interesting in different. Whiskey's interesting in its own way. It's different from beer. It's different from wine. It's different from gin.
Well, to be fair, for somebody who actually doesn't drink, I now know quite a bit about alcohol because of you.
And I'm a fan of the teas and coffees that you drink. I am also a coffee aficionado. Mm-hmm. Tea, not so much, but I do also appreciate tea. So, we're kindred spirits. I think, eventually when you grow up, you're going to join us.
Says the toddler.
Yeah.
And Ranga, what's been the experience for you?
So, look, it's been good. So, when I look back to where we started from, obviously, when we started, I was looking at one of the very, very first episodes that we had and the equipment that we had on the show there. I think we had a phone, some camera, and even the set itself. And, so that's how we started. But the vibe was there from day one. And we were actually very clear on what we wanted to achieve on this show, and I think we've done more than that in terms of getting the conversations going and getting people interested in these things that we discuss. Remember, this is not like your typical day-to-day stuff that gets so many people talking, but we are simplifying things that ordinarily would look like complicated and get people excited about all these things. And also, we have actually grown as a result of also the feedback that we have been getting from our these viewers. So
very scathing.
Exactly. On some occasions, I would just go home and thinking like, I've done such a bad job. And these guys will be complaining about sound and the quality of the visuals. And remember, we are not professionals. We are just investment people.
Just a bunch of amateurs, actually.
Yes. But it just tells you that with consistent, you could possibly achieve whatever you set out to do.
Thanks to you subscribers, Ranga actually loosened the purse strings, and he spent a bit of money on the sound, on the cameras, on everything.
So when are we going to be on X? Because Tinashe and I are fans of what was formerly Twitter. YouTube has a culture of censorship and shadow banning, and X is a free speech platform.
You can't say that. We're still on YouTube.
I think the transition to X is going to be a very exciting one, because unlike on Twitter where we started on zero, on X obviously, on YouTube rather, where we started from scratch. On X, obviously, there's already some critical mass that is already there on your, I think on each one of us is individual accounts, and also maybe even the Friday drinks handle itself. So yeah, we're certainly going there. That's where most of the conversations are had anyway. Yeah, but that space tends to be very, very violent. It's actually not for people of with disposition. Yeah,
With disposition.
Yeah,
but I'm happy that the tribe is growing in a lot of ways, and that what really warms my heart is when we hear that A-level students are actually watching some of our shows in their economics classes, commerce, O-level commerce, and sometimes schools in Harare and also schools far away in Nyanga. We've had schools that consistently watch the show and use it as a basis of learning.
So that's exactly. Well, look, when we started, maybe we didn't have that in mind. We thought maybe we were going to capture the attention and the imagination of people that are already sort of initiated in these things. But I think in a way we have actually contributing positively to society. So if kids in high school are watching this and using it as a reference point, just talking about that recently, actually in my circle, one of my friends actually invited me to discuss career issues with one of his kids, and they're saying they actually do watch the show, and I was surprised because I didn't expect
You never
that.
imagined, huh?
Yes, so we actually reaching out to so many viewers, and in a small way making a contribution.
Rufaro is passionate about
Cheers to
ESG.
that.
Do we get
ESG?
carbon?
Are you serious?
What
Are you kidding
exactly?
me?
What kudos points do we get? Is it carbon footprint? Is it
My gosh.
governance? What is it? Is it social responsibility? Please help me.
ESG is such a scam, and I think for the benefit of our audience, it's an acronym for environment, sustainability, and governance, which ordinarily are noble ideas, right? We want the environment, we want clean air, we want clean water, we want to be able to enjoy nature, we want things that are to be sustainable, we want good governance. But it was hijacked, by the woke crowd, and it's just become a dirty word now.
But here we are, and we somewhat contributing to
The social
But look, I
aspect
think,
in a positive way.
and the learning aspect. I mean, people are.
You guys like to coo about it. I think for me, I'm just having a tipple and expressing myself and evangelizing free market capitalism.
An excuse to drink on camera.
Yes, and also to evangelize free market capitalism. I think that, it gets a bad rap. There's this caricature of people in business, people who are out there looking for profit, being exploitative, being greedy,
and bringing expensive whisks on camera, or at least everyone else is doesn't know where the next meal is gonna come from.
And then morally and ethically, just having no principles. We're just out there for the money. And the communists get this good rap as, oh yeah, they actually care about the poor and the vulnerable and underprivileged. And yes, their policies don't often work out, but their heart is in the right place. And I think that if we don't actually speak out for free market capitalism and point out the historical data that nothing else has lifted more people out of poverty, nothing else creates prosperity in human society, I think that will be lost on society, and then we will dabble more in socialism.
Ranga, you think differently. What are your thoughts on this?
I believe that capitalism cannot exist in a vacuum. So a capitalistic agenda that leaves out the society is bound to fail. If it doesn't fail, then it will create a lot of social unrest that might actually hinder the progress of the capitalist. I think in a society, especially young and growing societies like ours, there is need to balance the two. So you want to have private enterprises.
Would you like to give us an example of where socialism or communism has actually worked?
So, by the way, I'm not rooting for socialism or communism.
Okay, what are you rooting for?
What I'm rooting for is it's possible to have a blend of private enterprise, an economy driven by private enterprise, but also still taking care of its vulnerable groups, not necessarily just as a social service, but also to make sure that they also, you uplift them so that you create a bigger base for the capitalist in future. So I don't think, like, one thing that actually a capitalist is always looking for, it's a market. So the bigger the market, the more prosperous your capital, your endeavors will be.
But how do you then prioritize the public good? Because what you're saying is there are certain public goods that are more valuable than others, and who are you to decide that this particular public good
It's actually
I mean, it's just like our tea versus
it's actually the community, because just look at
but that's the market system, right? The market system
yes.
determines the price mechanism, determines what the community values the most. If the community values education the most, then they're willing to spend a little bit more.
No, but you're making an assumption that the community actually has got the resources to be able to do that. So I think it also depends with the stage at which the community is. So if you're just starting, you've got a younger population, everyone is, the income generating capacity is still very low, you need to uplift them. Just look at a situation where maybe someone sets up a big retail shop in a certain neighborhood. If you don't have enough, if you don't have a population that has got capacity, that's earning enough, you won't be able to drive your sales. But imagine a theoretical situation where you're also participating in uplifting these people, so they are going to school, they are in good health. Obviously, 5-10 years from now, that entrepreneur will be able to have a bigger base to sell to.
So, Ranga, can I tell you that the question that you have posed was answered 250 years ago by
I don't
a
think
man called Baptiste Say, and he says that supply creates its own demand. So you address the supply problem, and it solves the demand problem.
So why has it failed to solve this conundrum that we have in African societies, where we have got on one side?
We haven't had a capitalist society in Africa.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing us back to Zimbabwe, and you know, maybe we can then segue into the post-election economic view. But if you were to ask me why Zimbabwe is poor today, right? I would say it was because of poor economic policy from 1965 during UDI. The country
nationalized, yeah.
You know, and in the 1980s and in the 1990s,
a pointless war. I think people always forget this, that 1965 to 1980, that was a pointless
from
war.
the perspective of the Smith regime. Yeah, they should have just accepted the directive. I think from the perspective of the other side, I wouldn't characterize it as pointless.
The other side was not funded by the state.
So what we're talking about is the state. Yeah. So
from the state funded.
So for sure, I agree with you. The state had no business being engaged in that particular war. They should have just read the writing on the wall politically, and they did not. And in the 1980s and the 1990s, we kind of we had a tax and spend economic policy. We did not embrace free market capitalism. We had all these parastatals and other businesses on the government's accounts that were hemorrhaging the fiscus, and it kind of, it's been a slippery slope, you know, south since, you know, like the 80s were better than the 90s, and the 90s were better than the 2000s.
But we did have a small respite between 2009 and 2013. In fact, we actually recovered and grew quite substantially.
Yeah. So I think that I agree with you that the government of national unity period economically was a good period, but it wasn't a great period. So and I think you've characterized it well. We were recovering. It's kind of like if you were on death's door. Like if I was, you know, if Frank and I had, you know, unfortunately had to come and visit you in ICU, and you'd lost half your weight.
Don't remind me of the 90s. We're still suffering from trauma of the 90s.
Right? Like, if you then bounce back to being yourself, right? Can we say that you've done something fantastic, or actually you're just back to where you were before you got sick? And
well, it's better than death.
Yeah, 1998 to 2008 is actually people have borrowed the expression from Japan's own period of stagnation, and they've called that, Zimbabwe's lost decade, because the economy shrunk 60% in real terms, which is remarkable for a country not at war. So and I think you shared just this week that the Ministry of Finance issued a GDP number for Zimbabwe's economy at 18 billion. Which is where we were in 2013, right? So we've done we haven't grown a dollar, it seems, in 10 years, So how are we on a path to emancipate ourselves from poverty if we can't grow our economy? So I think,
is the economy a priority? And maybe this is a good way for us to segue into the actual topic of the day. But I like this preamble because it actually gives the context to the issues that we want to discuss. And what we want to discuss is the economic, social, and political impact of illegal immigrants in SADC. So I will get Ranga maybe to just give us a context on what is an illegal immigrant, and what then Rufaro can then come in on maybe the social and economic impact in Southern Africa.
So an illegal immigrant obviously is a person that moves into another country or territory without papers, like in simple terms.
No documentation.
More documentation. So whether they so usually it's when they do that for a longer period, it's very unlikely that a person can be an illegal immigrant just for a week or two. So usually someone that just wants to cross into another country.
That's important.
For that short period, they'll have papers, but they are going there for specific reasons. But with illegal immigrant is someone that is planning to have a life in another country, but they don't have documentation for them to be accepted.
So they break the immigration rules
Yes,
of that particular country.
Of that particular country. So they are not accounted for as they exit from their country, and also not accounted for as they get in. Sometimes they are accounted for as they exit. So if it's a scenario where you are probably going on the pretext that you are going to be staying there for a week, yet you are intending to be there forever. It happens a lot, especially when people get an opportunity to go into Western countries. Imagine there is some activity that takes someone to the UK and they're meant to be there for a week, and then the moment you get in London, you just disappear. So look, so it's a big issue. People are always moving for different reasons. And since we are limiting it mostly in Africa, it's mostly for economic and also sometimes political or social reasons.
Why is it a problem, or why has it really captured the global voice or the global newspaper space or political space, where you look at Germany, you look at the UK, you look at Europe, you look at America, immigration, especially illegal immigration, has become topical. Why has it become topical?
Well, look, I think, just from a political perspective, the immigrant is a great scapegoat. And I'm not making the case that all illegal immigration is benign. I'm just making the case that from a politician's point of view, immigrants make fantastic scapegoats. If your economy is not growing, if people aren't getting jobs, if you're you're not able to provide social welfare to the satisfaction of your people, you can, immigrants make great scapegoats for these kind of problems. You can say, look, the reason why we have this issue is because we're letting all these others who are not like us into our country, right? And so throughout history, this in-tribe, out-tribe conflict is a part of human nature and how societies have issues, and so it's an easy go-to ticket for the politicians to say, look, your problems are because of these people, who've come from, outside. And I think in Zimbabwean context, we've got this diaspora in South Africa.
Well, before we get there, I actually would like to differ.
Yeah.
I think that it's not just purely scapegoating. I think that there's a real issue. The real issue is, and it's something that we actually discussed earlier on, and you highlighted, that the world has become more and more a welfare state. So as the Western nations become more and more welfare states, more and more social services, people get free social services.
For sure.
So if we were to look at maybe, let's call it 50 years ago, no one was really worried about carrying the burden of an illegal immigrant, because an illegal immigrant could not get hospitalized for free, could not get free welfare. They had to work for it. So and they would pay their taxes. So it was like, well, we don't really care about them. In fact, they're actually helping us grow the economy. But as more and more states become
welfare
states, and there's more and more social goods that someone can go to the UK and claim social benefits, similarly in South Africa. And that is the burden of the state. And I think you have a very colorful example that you gave at dinner at some point, of Zimbabweans in Limpopo, that people cross the border so that they can give birth. And
they're not coming. And they're not just coming from near the Limpopo and crossing the Limpopo. Like people
Harare.
travel from Harare. They go to Messina and they
and
because
it's not just in so it used to be mostly in Messina, but do you know that people are actually now doing that even into Zambia as well? So people are actually crossing into Zambia to get medical services, like really basic medical care for that. So this when you look at it, these are like it's a genuine need actually that people are trying to resolve. It's not like they're going there for
because it's a freebie.
Yes, but not only is it a freebie, but the services are there, because even our hospitals, they offer free service or maybe highly subsidized service, but the service is just not there.
Yeah, the state is not providing. But
the
burden, so it's not just scapegoating. That's the point I wanted to make. That there is a serious burden on SADC countries, because if SADC country in Zambia, or more specifically South
our
Africa,
neighbors basically.
South Africa, but specifically I think Botswana and South Africa, where they provide free healthcare, they provide free housing, they provide free schooling. If somebody is coming from Zimbabwe and ends up in South Africa and gets documentation or sort illegally, then they're privy to those social services, and now the state cannot afford it. And the question I have for you gentlemen is, if it's a problem, why can't South Africa just close the border? Why do they have porous border?
Closing the border is actually not. It's not a good idea. If anything, even before you pose that question, I was going also to pose a question that says, okay, when you talk of illegal immigrant, where does this discussion leave us vis-a-vis the calls for borders to be actually open? I remember in one of the shows, I think it was Rufaro, who was making a point that we are paying so much interest to these borders that were created some 100 years ago in Berlin and things like that. If anything, Africa must not have a border. People must be able to freely move. But for that to happen, obviously, you need to, I think the African leaders, as peers, they need to have honest conversations about certain basic standards that have to be met by every country, so that people don't cross into this country for a basic service. You know?
If you didn't have social services, then I don't think that you would have borders. Borders wouldn't matter, because people would then move quite freely, and then you will have to work for your own upkeep once you get into
Wherever you go, yeah,
wherever you go.
100%.
But now the problem is you've got social services, so it's got a social impact. The other economic impact is that when the illegal immigrants, or usually the poor and uneducated immigrants, when they move to South Africa, for example, is they reduce the wage rate. I'm not saying that I agree with that economic theory, but I'm just saying that it has a real impact to those that are seeking jobs or in jobs where somebody is coming and is willing to offer their labor at a lower cost.
You know, whether the narrative is false or not, that Zimbabweans steal jobs from South Africans when they cross the border, the reality is a lot of people in South Africa believe this narrative, which is why you've seen these, incidents of xenophobia, and the politicians are seized with it, and they're talking about rescinding permits for Zimbabweans and sending.
So what I want you to answer is, first of all, is it a real problem that requires a real solution beyond just the rhetoric, or it's a political problem that requires a political solution? So that's what I want us to first.
So I think just it's a real problem in that if I look at it through the lens of free market capitalism, I don't think it's a problem. I think if people aren't coming into your country and breaking the law, committing crime, behaving badly, if they're actually being accretive to your economy, they're hardworking, paying taxes, law-abiding citizens, then you shouldn't have a problem with it.
We're not taking your social services, because I think that's the problem. So
yeah, but these people are working and they're paying taxes. So are they? So the question then becomes, I actually think the problem from a social services perspective is the Zimbabwean who wants to give birth, crosses the border, gives birth, right? Participates in your
social
health
services. It's a subsidy. So on your own, you are going to go to a clinic and you're going to pay a market rate, but you're not paying a market rate because you're subsidized by the state. And your tax is not enough.
So this is the point that I'm trying to make. I'm saying there are two types of individuals who are drawing from the social service, right? There's the guy who crosses the border, right, because they're unwell or they need to give birth or whatever, and they participate in a social service, right, without ever contributing anything in that economy. Then they leave when their problem isn't solved, and they come back and they live in another country. Then there's a person who actually comes into your country and they get a job and they're working and they're paying payroll taxes, right? And they're paying municipal rates wherever they live. They're actually contributing into the system and earning a living, right? So to the extent that person,
but they're carrying a subsidy.
Yeah. So
the question is, actually, the guy who comes in might turn in the lifespan. Let's say if we put it at 10 to 20 years, they're only doing that when they're critical. So they're not really a cost. The problem is somebody who comes in
and they're chowing every day.
And they're chowing every day, and they take subsistent wage cut, and so they cannot provide for themselves, and they're chowing every day for the next 10, 20 years. You're the investment analyst. Explain it to us.
So I think maybe just to try and give it a historical perspective. So like when you look at the case of Zimbabweans going to South Africa, it has been going on for a long time. I know about Wenera. I don't know if in the 40s, but I think things are a bit different now, because the people who were going to Wenera, they were just going to work, but there was demand for that kind of labor, which probably was not being met by the local population for one reason or another. And I don't think that those guys were so much of a drain on the...
Well, there were no social services.
Yes. And also the fact that the main reason for them being there was to work, get their money, then remit funds back to Zim. But over the years, because of the deterioration in the quality of social services in our country, we have got a situation where people are actually going into South Africa to set up base. So you're looking at a situation where from having just maybe mainly the breadwinner are crossing the borders and sending money back.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, now we have got families going into South Africa. So husband and wife and kids, even kids that are being actually moved from Zimbabwe to there because schooling there is probably cheaper or is for free. So that's where
and better.
Yeah, and better. so indeed that is a problem. And I think that's what I'm saying. There are conversations to be had to try and understand why we have moved from a strictly labor-related, someone that is looking for a job, to people who are actually intending to call South Africa their home, and yet they are crossing the borders illegally. And it's actually creating problems for South Africans. And I understand, because now it's not just one person, the breadwinner, but they're bringing the entire family. And
that's a very good point. You know, in South Africa, you have, I think it's, the last time I checked, it was closer to 20 million South Africans who are not paying any sort of tax, but get some sort of welfare payment or sort. And if you think about those 20 million, how many are from Zimbabwe? How many, you know?
Yes.
And again, you know, people might point a finger and say that we're just thumbsucking this, but we know that in South Africa, they say about 20% of the IDs, South African IDs, are fake IDs.
Yeah.
Right? So because of corruption
so anyway, that leads us into the conversation about why SADC.
I think we need to give color to this conversation, that this is a real problem. Before we even get to the politics, it is a real problem. And it's a real problem because South Africa is shrinking. The number of people who actually pay tax is substantially less from those that are taken from the system, because it is a welfare state. South Africa is a welfare state that is actually not growing. So the social demands are huge, and they cannot afford Zimbabweans going to South Africa. Simple, straightforward. We need to make that very, very clear, that that's a substantial issue before we actually get into the politics of what are, maybe, because I know you're very passionate about this, or you want us to get as quick as possible, but maybe explain to us.
I'm a patient guy. I run marathons.
What does it mean for Zimbabweans, where you now have a significant portion of your population that is foreign, that is illegal? Politically, what does that mean? Does it change the complex of the politics of the nation?
So, from a Zimbabwean perspective, if I think about it, firstly, in economic terms, we get about $2 billion a year through formal channels in remittances. I suspect that there's a whole bunch more that comes through informally. So what that is it's a social safety net, because literally there are millions of families, or maybe not families, or individuals who are subsisting from diaspora remittances. And if these people were despondent and in despair because they had no such social welfare, it would potentially be a political problem in terms of social unrest, crime, and that sort of thing. So it definitely moves the needle. It's in as much as we don't have a functional public welfare state, we have $2 billion a year in remittances, which is meaningful. So I would.
But what you're actually saying is that there's a perverse incentive for Zimbabweans to actually do badly, so that we send people across the border, and I think that's the clash. And Ranga, that I think that's the clash. That actually there's no incentive whatsoever for the present government or any government in Zimbabwe to actually get things to work, because it turns out that the more people we send across the border, the better it is for our economy, because we're getting a full unencumbered dollar from South Africa with no cost whatsoever, right? Or what are your thoughts? Because I think that's the clash. So
I think when you're looking at the two states, South Africa and Zimbabwe. Obviously, South Africa is the one that has to make the most noise. Zim has created a problem, and they're not having to deal with their problems. They actually ship it to the next guy indirectly. Then it becomes a problem for South Africa and actually a benefit to Zim.
Yes, exactly.
To Zim in the sense that, like what Rufara have said, so you have emptied the pool of potential problems, unrest, and such demands, and yet in return you're actually going to be getting some flows, money is coming, income coming into the country. So you've reduced the level of disgruntlement and also the people that you have to put on your meager social welfare program. And in addition, you actually have got monies that you are boasting. You're boasting about. We received 2 billion, and you don't really look at the underlying. That's why it's very unlikely that this can actually be seen as a problem. As a problem in Zimbabwe, it's actually not a problem. You know, and I think you sometimes hear stories. Oh, if you're not happy, go to the next guy. You know, those kind of conversations, because not only do that result in less people making noises, but it actually brings money.
You bring out a very important fact that Afrobarometer, I think in the last survey, you had, I think, a third of people who were saying we're going to leave the country because of the economic situation. Then another third was saying we're going to wait until after the elections and we're going to leave the country. And if you're the Zimbabwean state, you're actually encouraging these people to cross the border. But from the South African side, you'd be worried.
You don't want these people.
You don't want these people.
In fact, they actually want the Zimbabweans who are there legally, who actually have permits, to leave. They want to actually rescind some of that paperwork.
If you're Ramaphosa, what are you thinking? You now have this problem. It's a real problem. We have substantiated that it is a real problem, especially on your social services, and you're not a growing economy, and you have more people who are planning on actually coming to South Africa. So it becomes a big immigration crisis. What are you going to do?
So I think, if you're sitting in Pretoria and you're thinking about this issue, you have an incentive for Zimbabwe to do well economically, right? Because if Zimbabwe is a $180 billion economy instead of an $18 billion economy, chances are a lot of these people are going to who are qualified teachers and nurses, and some of them have other professional qualifications, who are waiting tables and working as maids. They would probably come back home and get better work and have a better quality of life in a $180 billion
and
Zimbabwean.
Less strain on your social services budget.
Absolutely.
You can actually increase.
Because first prize for most people is to live in their home country, right? Emigration is really out of necessity, not, for the most part. It's not a choice. People aren't deciding that. I think, life is better in South Africa, or otherwise you wouldn't have any rich people in Zimbabwe, right? They'd all just leave.
Absolutely.
Right. So home is first prize for most Zimbabweans. They'd rather live here. And if our economy was doing better, a lot of those who have emigrated would actually, it would make sense for them to come back and for them to get better work. So you want Zimbabwe to be doing better economically, which is why you've seen this initiative led by President Chisano, the former Mozambican president, with Adesina at AFDB, to resolve Zimbabwe's debt issues so that Zimbabwe can raise money and that capital will be a stimulus.
So just to reiterate, especially for our crowd, the Adesina and Chisano initiative has to do with arrears clearance and debt restructuring.
Absolutely.
Where we owe about $18 billion. And part of it is we have three pillars. The first is economic reforms. And then the second is good governance, including elections and human rights. And third is compensation of the white farmers. And the AU, SADC are behind this initiative because if we solve that, we manage to do two things. First, we can remove Zidera. And that then will allow.
And Zidera,
IMF,
just for the benefit
World
of
Bank,
the audience, Zidera is the
American,
act, the US act under which we're under targeted sanctions.
Yes, certain individuals are under targeted sanctions. But I think more importantly, what it does, if you remove Zidera, is IMF and World Bank and all those multilateral institutions.
And also there's, one of the unintended consequences of targeted sanctions is that there's a perception that Zimbabwe is under sanctions that are not targeted.
It's well,
So
not just the perception. There's the idea that you're a pariah state.
Yeah. So
And
if you're running a bank in London or New York or any financial center, and Zimbabwe comes into your inbox or onto your dashboard, and there's an opportunity to allocate capital, there you're just going to say, this is too hard.
You just don't want to. But the point I want to highlight is, so we had the AU and SADC and the Paris Club initiative under Chisano, and I think Chisano really manages the politics around it, and Adesina
is the technocrat.
Is a technocrat, and they say, you know what, let's solve this. Now, we then have an election, and we get a very scathing report from SADC, and we are making the assertion, based on the facts, that I think part of the SADC report is driven by the frustration around the immigration. Are we correct in making this assertion? I mean, that's the context, in that you have an election. None of the SADC countries would really care if, you've got Swaziland and you've got some really bad places in Africa where things, and usually this is a rubber stamping opportunity for a lot of these guys. But you have a situation where the backdrop in which you're having elections is around the debt restructuring. So we've got a program where we've actually said, you know what, we want good governance. And then you have an election and it doesn't go as well as you'd hope it would do. It derails the debt restructuring problem. So is part of the SADC election monitoring group, is a part of their report really due to the frustrations, or even the AU, due to the frustrations of us not solving our problem for the last 20 years?
So we can't hide away from the fact that the Zim problem has actually become an African problem, especially in southern Africa, in SADC countries. And you see it manifests itself through the level of migration, where Zimbabweans are just crossing borders to any country. It's no longer just South Africa right now.
Yeah, there's Botswana, there's Zambia, there's Mozambique.
Yeah, so the Zimbabweans are
Even Malawi.
Yeah, Zimbabweans are saying anyway else but Zimbabwe, and it's worrying. So if you've got that problem that we have articulated with South Africa, just imagine what the level of migration would have in some other poorer countries in the region. So South Africa has got capacity. It's a big economy. But if you start going into other neighboring countries like Zambia, like we are already doing, and Mozambique and even Malawi, immediately we are creating a bigger problem. And I would understand if there's any frustration, if maybe what came out of the SADC report could be linked to any frustration, because probably they're saying you've got an opportunity to make things right. And the Adesina President Chisano initiative is very clear in terms of what needs to be done. And whereas things like maybe being able to pay off the farmers the 3.5 billion, things that we may not have control over because we don't have the money. We need to approach international capital markets. Things like good governance and just having elections
the boxes.
that meet SADC guidelines. I think those are things that ordinarily you're expected to be able to do. And I don't think there's such a high bar. Yeah, it's such a high bar. And when they even go further to say you are not even meeting your own standards, etc. So I think
it's this frustration now spilling
yes.
over.
So I think we should actually take an opportunity to try and introspect, look at ourselves in the mirror and say, what do we need to do? Because just imagine as a family, when you just get even every other uncle, every other aunt, they are coming to do with your issues. Surely they can't all be wrong. It's an opportunity to just correct where we can correct. And right now we don't have an excuse to say these are external forces. These are our brothers, the frontline states, the people that we have been working with, and they are feeling directly the impact of the migration that we are talking about. I'm sure we deserve to just listen to them and then find ways of...
So, Rivera, the question I'm going to ask you, and I want you to perhaps help us here, is, under the ADCINA structure, the three pillars, you've got economic, and you've got the compensation of the white farmers. The compensation of the white farmers is tied to ZIDERA, but economic reforms, so if we can't get the governance issues right, what confidence do you have that we can get the economic reforms correct?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, and I think we discussed it to some extent. Why is the Chisano ADCINA initiative even talking about elections, right? They should just care about cash flow because it's a debt restructuring, right? So if we can demonstrate that we can, because if you're a banker, what you care about is not your client's politics. You care about their capacity to pay you back and their cash flows. And that's what you're going to focus on. You're going to ask about collateral, you're going to ask about their business strategy, about the markets that they're in and that sort of thing. So why did that initiative even have that language in the first instance? And I think it speaks to a lack of confidence, which is didn't come from nowhere, right? We've been having conversations about being in arrears and having debt issues for decades now. And I think it's only when a certain level of frustration sets in to people then say, actually, you know what,
it's not an economic problem. It's a governance problem.
Maybe the way you're running your house is the problem. Is part of the problem, and we need to include it in the solution that you need to have these governance issues. And I think so. And speaking to his point about the frontline states, the default setting of every liberation.
We don't have the frontline states anymore.
Yeah, but
historically.
Yes.
Yeah, but what I'm saying
you
is
can't run away from that. When one of the chaps that came recently, yes. One of the chaps that one of the elders that came, I think on one of his first interviews, he was talking about how we attained our freedom and liberation as a region. So obviously, whatever we do, and even the conversations around the sanctions and sometimes the elections, they are still tied to that historical.
Uh,
Is that why we have the elders led by Kikwete?
Yeah. So the default setting of these liberation parties is to support each other, right? Mm. So it's actually unusual for SADC, which is run by liberation movement parties for the most part, to be critical of
the allegations that you have a rogue. It was the rogue head of commission, Neves.
No. There's no way
that he's actually rogue, and
there's no way that because it's a SADC report, it's not a Zambia report, right? Mm-hmm. And there's no way.
And the Secretariat has come forth and said
there's no way that, the big brother, Cyril in Pretoria didn't sign off on this. SADC is definitely fully behind this. And I don't think for them it's that, they have a political agenda. I think that the preamble to this discussion about the immigration problem is that they have an economic agenda. They're saying, listen, your country is not working, fix it, right? And they've had these conversations for the longest time, and now they have reached a level of frustration where they actually care about the politics. That's my view. And it's
And I want you then to take your optimism, because of all of us, you're the one who's actually more
so if you
optimistic about this. Maybe let me give you a few moments where you can actually share your optimism with the crowd and tell us where you're deriving the optimism from.
So if you look at just in the 21st century, since the turn of the century, if you look at every election that's happened in Zimbabwe, when the official numbers were announced, the losers always cried wolf. This thing, was rigged. There's a problem, and only once did SADC actually intervene and say, you know what, there's a problem. Let's sit around the table and fix it. And that's 2008. And so this didn't happen before that, and it hasn't happened since, which is why I was struck by the preliminary report.
But let me push back there. One could argue that 2008, people actually died. So by the time you had the runoff,
people died in 2002.
People.
We've had violence in this part of the world. So what happened? For them to intervene, and again, it was also an economic crisis, right? The supermarkets were empty. Things were really bad. And SADC intervened and they said, look, you know what, let's have a conversation. And then it was resolved in the Global Political Agreement, which was signed in February 2009, and we had a JNU for 5 years. And this is the first election since 2008 in which SADC has actually said, I think there's a problem here. And I don't think it's an academic exercise.
You don't think they're going to walk back? Because this is let's make it very clear, this is a preliminary report. We now have the Troika, and the Troika is Zimbabwe, it's Zambia, Tanzania, and Botswana. And we know how they are going to react.
Do we?
Well, we can make
look, maybe I think we were actually getting deep into the weeds and the politics of this whole thing. But I think what's critical is the fact that we have got problems, and our problems had actually become also a problem to our regional brothers and sisters. And the fact that they've pointed it, I think we still need to have conversations amongst ourselves and say, what do we need to do to try and deal with these issues? Because these issues are genuine.
Are you optimistic about this report? You don't think that they're going to walk back? Do you think that something will come out of the SADC report? And then put us back on the Adesina Chisano guardrails?
I'm not really moved much by whether they stick to it or walk back, but history will always record that in 2023, SADC said these were the issues. And all the efforts that are being made to try and maybe influence the final outcome, I don't think it will change that as a fact. And I think maybe going forward, we need to try and draw some positives from it. What can we learn from it? You need to start asking yourself, wait a minute, even my brothers are now
raising these
issues.
But I think the preamble...
and also the fact that those specific issues are part of the Adesina, it means these conversations were already happening behind the scene. So it's not really, it didn't come as a surprising thing. It was raised in the date, like you rightly said, ordinarily, when you're dealing with debt and that's delinquent, it's a purely financial issue. But the moment you start seeing your bank saying, please bring your wife, please bring your kids, they're trying to understand that maybe your failure to pay, it probably goes beyond
Just the economics.
Yeah, just the economics. Maybe there's something that happens at home, and one of the kids is like, yeah, this is what he does whenever he gets some money. so conversations were already taking place. So if something was to be done, I think it would just be for public posturing. But I am happy that at least the countries in the region, they're beginning to actually dealing with the same
And it's
issue.
the frustration
Yes,
of the immigration
directly.
Yeah. So this is the source of my optimism, right? If you think about President Mugabe in 2008, the man was no pushover, right? So why did he have a conversation after winning an election and being inaugurated? Because his brothers were saying to him, my friend, you have a problem, right? And they were saying this.
Do you think that the government of our current government would draw any lessons from the Mugabe situation? That
So I think one of the lessons, like if we're just going to be objective about analyzing the ruling party's actions over the last couple of decades, there was one of the reasons why there was tremendous optimism in after November 2017 was this idea that Mugabe was the problem, and now that he's gone, all the problems have gone
away
with him, right? And so I think we've all done our corrections in terms of our thinking around how things work. And what that also tells us is that it wasn't just Mugabe who was negotiating, right? It was the party that was having that conversation. Okay. And so even though Mugabe is gone, a lot of the people who are actually intimately involved in
memory.
that, yes, a lot of the people who were involved in that conversation in 2008 are still here today. And when that call comes from Cyril or whoever it's coming from to say, look, guys, you have a problem.
But Rufaro, is it not possible for the government to go it alone and institute the economic reforms that are necessary? So to first of all, given what we've said of the immigration crisis, to first of all just recognize, so the government of the day recognizes that, maybe we've been tone deaf, maybe we actually didn't understand why our brothers were coming after us. They're coming after us because actually we are causing these problems in their domestic economies. And what we're going to do now is we acknowledge it and we're going to reform. And we're going to institute the economic reforms. We don't need to have, SADC overseeing us. So going back to your domestic issue is, okay, maybe my problem was the drinking problem. I'm going to stop.
Why are you attacking us drinkers?
Of course, you actually expect...
choose a different example. Why don't you talk about...
You actually expect someone
Why don't you talk about gamblers?
Okay, all right.
Okay, I'm also betting my no. Don't attack gamblers.
So I didn't understand it was a problem. So now I'm going for counseling and I'm going to solve it. And I'm going to work hard and this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to deliver the economic reforms. Forget about the political reforms, but now I've recognized that your issue is because there are all these economic immigrants that are coming from my country into your countries, and now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to solve. So what I will do behind closed door is to say, you know what, I will institute the economic reforms. Is it possible for the government to actually institute the economic reforms outside of the Adesina, Chisano guardrails?
I think it's very difficult.
Explain that to us.
It's very difficult given where we are right now, that we have got debt in areas running into billions of USDs. So it's an issue that needs to be dealt with. And we also have got this whole issue where over the years, like in the last 5 years, we've lost a tremendous amount of investment just by looking at the businesses that have actually closed shop. Your Standard Chartered are on their way out, Barclays and other players. It means in terms of the policy environment, we really have not been able to do that. And look, just look at where we started from 1980, that it has been like a slippery slope in terms of, and it was mostly because of the policies. So I think even, I don't see how we are able to do that on our own. Why the Adesina structure was going to be interesting to me is because we have got it provides some guides. It provides some ways of actually.
It's a holistic program.
It's holistic, and it also it's a framework that we can work with, and that because if we just do it ourselves, is whenever we feel like it's not working, or for whatever reasons, we can just walk back from our own plans. So I don't think it's possible that we can.
So I think I support
internally.
You. Yeah.
I don't think we can reform internally. I think it's best that we work with African Development Bank. These are our brothers. I think we were saying the IMF, the World Bank, they are bringing in their policy. ISAB didn't work for one reason or another. It's neo-imperialism. But surely we can't accuse ADB of that, because they've been a major supporter of us, even when the rest of the funders were taking.
So I just want to support Ranga's point that we're at the teethers, in the sense that our creditors, even our newfound creditors, Afrexim Bank, China Zim Bank, the new creditors have problems with us, right? So the question is, going back to your point of 2017, post 2017, Afrexim Bank poured about $1.4 billion to Zimbabwe.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to find that sort of capital anymore, because almost all our creditors are looking at us and thinking, you guys need to solve this.
No, we're delinquents. Let's just call a spade a spade.
So I think
we have been delinquents for the longest time, and our partners and our friends and brothers, even in the region, are at a point where they're frustrated, and this is what is behind this initiative to intervene, to say, look, you know what, guys, your failure doesn't just hurt you, it hurts us as well. You need to put your house in order.
And think about it. So I'm told by the producer it's time up, so I'll have the final word. I think you guys have said, but I think we sort of all agree. I don't know about optimism, but I think
I'm optimistic. Yeah,
but I think we need
to
make.
We have to be optimistic, and also to give our viewers optimism, because this is the reality that we're facing. Yeah.
All right, but I think what I need to make very clear, and what we're getting from this conversation, is we have door A, where we could say to hell with everybody, and we go it alone. But unfortunately, Afrexim Bank, none of the creditors are willing to loosen up their purse strings and give us that opportunity to actually grow. And if we have new creditors, unfortunately, it's going to be at exorbitant interest rate, and we can't even service the new creditors that we already have. So we're in a debt trap. So door number A, if we say to hell with everybody, well, we are in for even a bigger problem. Then you've got door number B, and it's a way out. It's an off-ramp. And the off-ramp is the Adesina Chisano initiative, where all these issues that SADC have raised, it's not because they are not our brothers anymore, but because they have this underlying frustrating issue, which is the immigration crisis. And what they are trying to tell us is, guys, there is a way out. Let's use this route. It's a way out. It means that we have to compromise to some end. We have to be under judicial management of sort. But
it's an intervention. That's what it is.
It's an intervention. But it's actually not, the point that we're trying to make is actually not a bad intervention.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a bad way of going, because if you think about it, then the pressure, the economic pressure goes away.
Mm-hmm.
We might get debt cancellation. If we do get debt cancellation, you are allowed to then access, let's call it
Fresh funding.
fresh funding. You get new investors coming in, and that might actually help you.
For sure.
And you're still in power, if you think about it. So I'm not so sure about the optimism. I think those are your guys' words.
I'm an eternal optimist.
I think
but the
that
data
when you
makes me optimistic.
When you look at DOE A and DOE B, it's very easy to see that DOE B is the answer. But, ladies and gentlemen, let us know what you think. Do you think we should go with DOE A? We can go it alone, and we've got the resources, and we'll try it. If it doesn't work, then we can always work back and go to DOE B. But you don't know what will happen by the time we work back. Or we just go with DOE B. And DOE B allows us, we're still the governing party, we're still the governing government, but allows us to get the reforms that we need to do, to abide by the SADC protocols, and to continue with the economic reforms and perhaps actually grow the economy.
And as a betting man, I think we're going to choose DOE B.
I'm not a betting man, but I think the doors are very clear. Let's hear your thoughts, and maybe we've missed something. As usual, we don't know what we're talking about. So maybe you know what you're talking about, and you can help us really get into the weeds of this matter. We certainly want this economy to grow. We certainly think that it's possible for us to grow. But at this point, our brothers are telling us something, and I think we need to listen. Otherwise, have yourself a wonderful spring, have yourself a wonderful weekend, and cheerio.